Thank you. You guys are the best. Thank you, Pace. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about this idea Pace has been sharing with finding and conquering your Mount Everest, right? Summiting your Mount Everest. And when I think about this and this idea that Pace has and this vision he has of each and every one of you finding and creating your very own Mount Everest, identifying what that is, I think of this as something that's like really big, like a legacy thing, a generational thing, something that's still around having impact long after you're gone, like that type of thing. And so what might that be as you start to think about your Everest? What might that be? And as I've thought about this idea around that and things in my own life, I believe each and every one of you are a son or daughter of God. And with that comes divine potential. And because of that, I think about my life and I think, I'm going to be dead a whole lot longer than I'm alive. But I'm going to have the rest of eternity to think about how I lived my life. And I think about that. You got the rest of eternity, if you believe in the afterlife, if you believe that, to think about the experience you had, because we know that this is a limited experience. And so I, for one, want to make the most out of this experience. Look at all those people coming in the door back there. That's the Norton crew. Hey, everybody. That's only like half of them, too. Big old bus. And so when I think about doing something big in this world, I think all of us, we have this life to try to figure that out. Like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What is the big thing I'm meant to do? And then to live into that purpose. And so I love this idea around finding your Mount Everest and then what it takes to do that. And last community camp here in July, when I spoke, I talked about a universal principle. And a universal principle is something that's established from the foundation of the world, right? It lives, and it is something that is true no matter what happens. And last time I talked about the law of sacrifice, which is the value of anything is only worth the sacrifice you made to get it. And I talked about this idea around the dip. And this time I want to talk about a different universal principle that's called the law of momentum. Who's heard of this? The law of momentum. And the law of momentum, I have to get really close to this thing. Maybe I'll just try this. The law of momentum says that when you start out something new, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, takes a lot of resources. But then as it gains motion and movement, what happens? Yeah, that's right. It gets easier. It moves along with a whole lot less effort. And so that's momentum. And when I think about momentum, think about the snowball effect, right? We've all heard of the snowball effect, which is as the snowball rolls down the hill, it picks up more speed and gets bigger and bigger. And that's kind of this idea around momentum. And again, in the beginning, how many of you feel like this when you're starting a new endeavor, a new business? It's pushing that boulder up a hill, and it's slow, it's tedious, it's hard. It feels like maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Who can relate to that? It feels like you're just inching your way forward. But then if you stick with it, what happens? Sure. You round that corner, and when you round the corner, what starts to happen? It starts to roll on its own. You're not having to push it. It moves down that hill, and it picks up speed as it goes. And so I think momentum, this law of momentum, this is the cheat code to business. This is how you really do something significant. Momentum is when, a seller calls you back 6 months later and says, I'm ready to sell. Momentum is when, everything just starts to come into place. The deal of a lifetime happens once a week, I believe, when you have momentum. Okay, so the relationships that you need, everything starts to come faster, easier. If you think about it, I think about this all the time. Your 10th deal is 10 times easier than your first deal, and your 100th deal is 100 times easier than your 10th deal. Just like making $1 million is easier than making 100,000, and making $10 million is easier than making $1 million. That's momentum. And so what are some ways that we can create momentum so that you can climb your Everest? I think there are five things that need to happen to create momentum, and I want to talk about each of these. Another analogy is the merry-go-round, right? When you first start the merry-go-round, you got to really push that thing, but what happens once it's going? A whole lot less effort, right? It just flies along. You better hold on. Yeah. The first thing to really create momentum is it has to be organic. And when I say organic, meaning that you're compelled because you have a really big purpose. And we like to call this your big why. Because if you have a big why behind your Everest, you don't need motivation. You get up excited in the morning. You tackle this project with a lot of energy. It's all about that energy you bring to your Everest. And if you've got that compelling reason, the big why, then you have the energy that's going to really create that movement, that motion that you need. And so that's a really big one. You're internally driven. And this is when your goals and your values align. Oftentimes in business, if we have these goals, but they're not aligning with our values, what happens? That's when you sabotage. That's when self-sabotage happens. So really aligning that vision with your values, the goals with your values, is how you can create that big why. So it has to be organic. Number two, it has to be generative. So that's self-generating, right? So momentum builds on itself. And I think about this as, for an example in my life is, in 2013, I'm flipping a lot of houses and I'm running my entire business on spreadsheets. So I think, you know what, I'm gonna put all these spreadsheets into a software, and we call it Flipster, and now we sell it on a subscription model. Well, that's generative, right? The things I'm doing are generating new revenue, new ideas. If you guys think about it, why was Gator created? Who knows why Gator was created? To solve a problem where? In sub 2, right? Gator is private money lending for sub 2. So see how that life is generating new ideas, new business. So it's got to be generative. And that's where the deals start to come faster and faster. I'll give you an example of this. One of the markets I do deals in is Knoxville, Tennessee. And in that market, we have right now like 9 flips or something, and we wholesale a lot there. And 6 months or so ago, I bought 53 acres. We subdivided it into 9 lots. We cleared some land, we put some roads in, and we're building some houses. Well, from that deal, a seller contacts me and says, I've got some land in Pigeon Forge. And so I contract on an option, 259 acres in Pigeon Forge, on an option with almost nothing down, 18-month option, almost nothing down, for $4.9 million. And then do nothing. I got 18 months, so I'm not in a hurry. Do nothing. A developer contacts me and says, I'll buy that for 5.5. Okay. And I say, no way. I got time, I'm not in a hurry, 5.5. So I said no to a $600,000 flip. Last week, another developer, not a developer, an agent contacts me and says, I have a developer that wants that. I don't know who this agent is. I didn't reach out to this agent. He says, I've got a developer that will buy this. And I said, okay, what's the number? He says 6.25, pay me $100,000 and I'll put the deal together. And guess what I said? No. I said, I'll think about it. Send me an LOI and I'll think about it. And he's like, what do you mean you'll think about it? I'm like, I'll think about it. So today we're supposed to get an LOI for 6.25. That's a $1.3 million flip on something I don't even own, right? I have it on an option. And so that's momentum. Right? I didn't reach out to these people, they're reaching out to me. Okay, that's momentum. When things start to happen naturally, faster, easier. Momentum has to be sustainable. And this really goes back to this idea around the compound effect, right? Has anybody read that book, Dan Hardy, The Compound Effect? What Dan Hardy says is small actions performed consistently over time is where you start to really see massive change. And that's what momentum has to have. It has to be sustainable. And he says, success is doing half a dozen things really well, repeated 5,000 times, right? That's that sustainability, when it can continue gaining that speed because it's sustainable. Number 4, it has to be protective. And what I mean by that is, I like to think about creating a business that's economy proof. And what does it mean if your business is economy proof? What do you think that means? It really doesn't matter what the economy's doing the business can survive. And how is it survivable? If a business is economy proof, what does it have to be? Well, it's got to adapt to change very quickly, doesn't it? Because if things change, so does the business. So it can protect itself because it's very innovative. It can innovate fast. It can bounce back from mistakes very quickly, right? That's a very protective business when it has that kind of momentum. And the fifth one is profitable, and this one's kind of self-explanatory. You know, the business, if it's got this momentum, it'll just continue generating revenue, and it can cut costs faster, and so it can just become very profitable once it has that momentum. And so when we think about it, I've got a few ideas around some tips to create this momentum. Like, okay, well, that sounds great. How do I create that type of momentum so that you can climb your Everest? And the first one is to take ownership. And this is this idea around you are exactly where you are today because of what? The choices you made in the past, right? And owning that. It's okay. It's okay, just own that. You are exactly where you are today from your previous choices. And so it's nobody else's fault. And when you take that massive ownership, that's step one to really starting to create momentum, because now you own this. You own this. Oftentimes we want to not own it. The second one is to be intentional. And this is something that my wife is a great example to me of this. This is something that is a very cultural thing in our family. And we talk a lot about this idea around choice and really choosing what it is you're doing. And to be intentional means that things just don't happen by themselves. They only happen when you create them and when you're thinking through and making conscious decisions around the things you want. You don't create momentum on accident, right? That has to be very intentional. You have to make those choices around what you're doing. The third one is avoid complacency. So the enemy to great is what? Good. Yeah, the enemy to great is good. Tony Robbins calls this no man's land. And no man's land is when your life really isn't that great. You're not really that happy with your life, but you're not unhappy with it enough to what? Make any change. Yeah. And this is the idea around the pain of staying the same. Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain, did I say that right? Yes. The pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Then you make the change. Yeah. So that's this idea around complacency. It's really the nemesis of momentum. Because once you create momentum, can you lose momentum? Yeah, if you start to coast, what can happen to the momentum? You can lose it, right? And that's where complacency can set in. The fourth one is to become self-aware. I was on a podcast the other day, and I was asked in the podcast, what was the number one thing that allows me to develop personally? That's been for personal development. And I would say self-confronting. And what is self-confronting? Yeah, this is when you look in the mirror and you say, am I living with integrity? Can I feel good about the way I'm showing up in my marriage or as a dad or in my business or with my spirituality, whatever it might be? Can I honestly look at myself and say, I'm doing the best I can? And oftentimes the answer is what? No. If you're humble and you're willing to self-confront. It's easy to see what everybody else needs to do better in their lives, right? The hardest part, one of the hardest things for humans to do is self-confront. So to look in the mirror and be able to say, am I really living my life with integrity? Can I really feel good about what I'm doing? And then when the answer is no, be willing to make those changes. Okay, that's what it means to be self-aware. And all change happens when you first become aware that you need to. And that's where I think part of that awareness, the only way to become aware is to measure. Right, is to track what's going on. In my wholesale businesses with my different markets and my different partners, I do this weekly level 10 meeting with them. And we have this tracking that I'm meticulous about, and we call it the LOAC, and it's basically leads, opportunities, appointments, contracts, closings. So LOAC, and that's the 5 things that I want to see. And I can tell the scorecard of our business just by looking at that LOAC. On a one screen dashboard, I can tell exactly the health of that wholesale operation by the LOAC, because the numbers don't lie, and I can see where the ratios are, and I can see where the holes in the boat are and the changes that need to happen for improvement. But only because what? We're tracking that. You cannot identify what you need to fix if you don't what? Know what you need to fix by tracking it. So measure your results. Number 6 is input better data. You know, the most successful people hire the best coaches. The most successful people surround themselves with other successful people. Jim Rohn said you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Or your income is the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Has anybody heard that before? Yeah, this is all about the environment you create. Okay, so inputting better data. Don't watch the news. The news is where they aggregate the saddest, the most depressing, and the most sensationalized stories, right? That's what the news is. And so how can you feed yourself better input? How can you put because it's garbage in, garbage out, isn't it? It's garbage in, garbage out. So do an inventory. What is your entertainment to education ratio? Right? Number 7 is to take imperfect action. I would rather see you take imperfect action than perfect inaction. And the problem here is that as humans, we tend to think that, well, I can't do step 1 until I know what? Yeah, step 7, you know. Once I know all 10 steps, then I'll take step 1. But the reality is to create momentum, what do we need to do? Take step 1 and then worry about what? Step 2. Take step 2 and then worry about what? Step 3. Now that's scary because it means you're walking in the dark a little bit. But you don't have to know everything to do something, do you? No. So oftentimes it's just take that first step and then walk in the dark a little bit, take the next step, trust the process. That's where tremendous growth can happen. But in business, we tend to be afraid of that, right? We tend to think, well, I better know everything before I can start doing something. Okay, so take that imperfect action. And then I think the 8th one would be to habit stack. Now, who's heard of that term before? Habit stack, okay, good. This is the idea around setting yourself up for success. And how do you make it so that it's easier for you to be successful at the things you're doing? So this might be like, you know, put your vitamins next to your toothbrush, or, you know, put the TV away in the closet so then it's like a lot of work to get it out, or put restrictions on your phone so it turns off social media without you having to have the discipline to do it. Things that will allow you to be successful at what you're doing, and that's stacking these habits. And when I think about like really creating this momentum, and maybe to close here would be, I really go back to what Dan Hardy teaches in this idea around how do you really create massive impact. And it's those small, smart choices that we make every day. And when you do that consistently over time, that's when what happens? That's when you see the massive change. That's when you climb your Everest. Okay, it's not this overnight thing that happens. It's not the big things. A great marriage doesn't happen when you do one trip to Italy, does it? No, it's the small acts of kindness every day that are what create an amazing marriage. It doesn't hurt, that's true. Yeah, definitely do the trip to Italy still. Definitely do the trip to Italy. But it's those small things that you do again and again that will compound and add up into massive results. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Sure love you guys.